Hi, good evening. In this video, we are going to talk about framing the Indian constitutions. By the way, the process of making constitutions is absolutely a very lengthy and extensive process, but it is a part of class 12th history NCRT chapter. So I will try to cover up some of the key themes of process, and I will also explain what way it come into the existence. If you talk about Indian Constitution, which come into the effect on 26 January 1950, has the dubious distinction of being the longest in the world, but its length and complexity are perhaps understandable when one considers the country size and diversity. At independence, India was not merely large and diverse, but also deeply divided. A constitution designed to keep the country together and to take it forward had necessarily to be an elaborate, carefully worked out, and painstakingly drafted document. For one thing, it sought to heal a wound of the past and the present, to make Indians of different classes, caste, and community come together in shared political experiment. For another, it sought to nurture democratic institutions in what had long been a culture of hierarchy and difference. The Constitution of India was framed between December 1946 and November 1949. During this time, this draft were discussed clause by clause in the Constituent Assembly of India in all the assembly. So held 11 session with sitting spread over 165 days. In between the season, the work of revising, refining the draft was carried out by various committee and subcommittee. So from your political science textbook, you know what had Constitution of India is. But when you are talking about the working process, then it takes the decades since independence. So the chapters will introduce the history and the life behind the Constitution and the intense debate that were part of its making. So if we try and hear the voice within the Constituent Assembly, we get an idea of the process through which the constitutions was framed and the vision of the new nations formulated. So let's we talk about the time period. By this time period, the constitution is supposed to be framed. The time period is called tumultuous time. The year immediately preceding the making of constitution had been just exceptionally tumultuous, very difficult time, a time of great hope, but also of abject and disappointment one hand. Another hand, 15 August 1947, India had been made free nation, but it had also been divided, fresh in popular memory for the Quit India struggle of 1942, perhaps the most widespread popular movement against the British Raj, as well as the bid of Subhas Chandra Bose to win the freedom through the armed struggle with foreign aid. And even more recent upsurge had also just evoked much and popular sympathy, and this was the rising of rating of Royal Indian Navy in the Bombay and other city in the spring of 1946 that we have also seen there. Through the late 1940, there were periodic and if scattered the mass protest of workers and the peasants in different parts of the country. One striking feature of this popular upsurge was the degree of Hindu-Muslim unity they manifested. In contrast, the two leading Indian political parties and the Congress and the Muslim League had repeatedly failed to arrive at a settlement that would bring about religious reconciliation and social harmony. The Great Calcutta killing of August 1946 began a year of almost constitution rioting across northern and eastern India. So the violence culminated in the massacre that accompanied the transfer of populations when the partition of India was announced. On the Independence Day, 15 August 1947, there was an outburst of joy and hope, unforgettable for those who lived through that time, but innumerable Muslims in India and Hindu and Sikh and Pakistan were now faced with a cruel choice, the threat of sudden death of the squeezing of opportunity on the one side and the forcible tearing away from their age-old root on the other. Millions of refugees were on the move, Muslim into East and West Pakistan, Hindu and Sikh into West Bengal and the eastern half of the Punjab. Many perished before they reached their destinations. Another and the scarcely less serious problem faced by the new nations was that the princely estate. So during the period of the Raj, approximately one-third of the area of subcontinent was under the control of Nawab. And that time we also see the another things like tertiary as they wish. So when the British left India, that time the constitutional status of this princely remained very much different because the princely states were not interested to become the part of the Indian Federation. So this was the background where we have the multiple challenge and constant assembly made. So how would the debate within the assembly remain like insulted from what was happening outside? So making of the Constituent Assembly, the member of the Constituent Assembly were not elected on the basis of universal franchise in the winter of 1945 and 46. So provincial elections were held in the India and the provincial legislature then choose the representative of the Constituent Assembly. So Constituent Assembly that came into being was dominated by one party and the Congress. So the Congress accepted the general seat in the provincial election and the Muslim League captured most of the reserved Muslim seat, but the League, Muslim League close to the boycott of the Constituent Assembly, and later on they also putting the pressure on the demand for the separations between India and Pakistan. So socialists too were initially unwilling to join. For the belief that Constituent Assembly was a creation of the British, so therefore incapable of being the truly autonomous. In effect, therefore 82% of the member of the Constituent Assembly were also member of the Congress. So the Congress, however, was not very party with one voice. Its members differ in their opinion on critical issues. So some members were inspired by socialism, while others were difference of landlordism, and some were close to the communal parties, while others were assertedly the seculars. So through the national movement, Congress members had learned to debate their idea in public and negotiate their differences. So within the Constituent Assembly too, Congress member did not sit quiet. So the discussions within the Constituent Assembly were also influenced by the opinions expressed by the publics, and as the deliberation continue, you can find out the deliberation in the way the arguments were reported in the newspapers, and the proposal was publicly debated. So the criticisms and the counter criticisms in the press in the turn just shaped the nature of the consensus, and that was ultimately reached the specific issues. In order to create a sense of collective participation, the public was also asked to send in their view on what needed to be done. Many of the linguistic minority wanted the protection of their mother tongues. Religious minority asked for the special safeguard, while the Dalit demanded an end to all caste operations and the reservation of seat in the government body. So important issue of cultural right and the social justice rise in the public discussion or debate on the floor of the assembly. The dominant voice in the Constituent Assembly had 300 members, of which 6 members played very much important role, in particularly important role. So there were the representative of the Congress, and namely the Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, Rajendra Prasad. It was Nehru who moved the gradual objective resolutions, and as well as the resolutions proposing the national flag of India be a horizontal tricolor of the saffron, and white and dark green in equal proportions, with the wheel in navy blue in the center. Patel, on the other hand, worked mostly behind the scene and playing a very instrumental role in drafting the several reports. And working to reconcile the opposing point of view. So Rajendra Prasad's role was a president of the assembly, and where he had steered the discussion along the constructive line while making sure all members had a chance to speak. Beside this Congress, the true powerful members, very important member of the assembly was the lawyer and the economist B.R. Ambedkar. During the period of British rule, Ambedkar had been a political opponent of the Congress party. But on the advice of Mahatma Gandhi, he was asked to take the role of drafting committee chairman, and finally serving with him were 2 other lawyers were also provided, K.M. Munshi from Gujarat and Alauddin Krishna Swami Iyer from Madras. Both the home have the crucial input in the drafting of the constitution. So these 6 members were given a very constructive role. Among them 2 civil servants. One was B.N. Rao, and constitutional advisor to the government of India, and who prepared a series of background paper based on the close study of the political system and obtaining other country. So we see the other was the chief drafting, the draughtman's S.N. Mukherjee, who had the ability to put the complex proposal in clear clear legal language. So Ambedkar himself had a responsibility of guiding the draft constitution through the assembly, and this took 3 years in all, with the printed records we have. So we see that the 11 bulky volumes have been prepared, but while process was long enough, so it was also extremely very much interesting. So the member of the Constituent Assembly were eloquent in the expressing their sometimes very divergent point of view in their representative, and we can discard many conflicting idea of India. So what language Indians should speak, and what political and language Indians should speak, and what political and economic system the nation should follow. So what moral value and its citizens should uphold, the discussions. The vision of the Constituent Assembly on the 13th December 1946, Jawaharlal Nehru introduced the objective resolution in the Constituent Assembly. It was momentaneous resolution that outlined the defining idea of constitutions of independent India and provided the framework one hand, so within which the work of constitutions maker making was to proceed, and it proclaimed India to be an independent sovereign republic, and guaranteed its citizens justice, equality and freedoms, and assured that adequate safeguard shall be provided by minority, backward and the tribal area, and depressed and other backward classes. After the outlining this objective, Nehru placed the Indian experiment in the broad historical perspectives. As he spoke, he said his mind went back to the historical effort in the past to produce its document and the right. So Nehru's speech, just having the merit and carefully scrutiny the entire things, whatever that times the governments had going on. So and the Nehru objectives, they make up comparative analysis of Indian constitution with America and French Revolution. Nehru was locating the history of the constitution, making India within the longer process, and it is the output of struggles and liberations, freedom. But Nehru was not suggesting about the providing any blueprint of the pressures, but other hand the idea of regulations could be mechanically borrowed from applied to the India. So he did not define the specific form of democracy, and he has even not suggested that it had to be decided through the deliberation. And he stressed that the ideal and provisions of the constitution introduced in India and could not be just derived from elsewhere. So we are not going just to copy. He said the system of government established in India, he declared, had to fit in within the temper of our people and acceptable the West from their achievement and failure. But the Western nations too had learned from the experiment, and elsewhere they too had changed their own notion of democracy. So objective resolutions is talking about socialism one hand, economic justice, readapting and reworking of the Indian constitutions, and creative thinking what appropriate for the Indian federations. Now Nehru ji resolution also discuss about the role of the people, what are the role of the peoples that time. So Somnath Lahiri was talking about drafting the British imperialism and hanging about the deliberation of the Constitutional Assembly. He put more focus on the role of nations and the relations of nations with their states, and intern administration's role that is also to be discussed in the assembly. Nehruji admitted that most nationalist leaders had wanted a different kind of constituent assembly. But it was also true in the sense that British government had hand in hand and attained the certain condition with the assembly that times. So the emphasized the Nehru, you must not ignore the source from which the assembly derives its strength, and Nehru added that. So the government do not come into the just being the state's paper, and the government are in the expressions of the will of the people. We have met here today because of the strength of the people and behind us, and we shall go as far as the people were talking about. So we should therefore always keep in mind the fierce passion that lie in the heart of the masses of the Indian people, and try to fulfill them. So the Constituent Assembly was expected to express the aspiration of those who had participated in the movements, and the democracy, equally justice were ideals, and that had become intimately associated with social struggle in India since the 19th century. So when the social reformer in the 19th century opposed the child marriage and demanded that widow be allowed to remarry, and they were pleading for social justice. When Swami Vivekananda campaigned for the reform in Hinduism, he wanted religion became a more just a practice, not to be very much affecting to the social lifestyles. So Jyotiba Phule in Maharashtra, he pointed to the suffering of depressed caste, and talking about the national movement against the government, and that was seen the oppressive and illegitimate even was inevitably to the struggle for democracy and justice. So for citizen and right and equality, in fact, the demand for reparations, and the British had been forced to introduce the series of the constitutional reforms. So number of acts were passed: 1909, British India Act, 1919, and 1935, gradually enlarging the space of Indian participation in provincial government. So in 1990, almost the entirely to be provincial, and by the 1935 elections were held in 1937 under the 1935 Act. So Congress came in power 8 of the 11 provinces. So yet we should not unbrokenly talking about the continuity, the things like that. So we are talking about the happening of the Constituent Assembly process, but behind there is a great history somehow. Thank you. It is a quite extensive video. I hope you people like. Thank you everyone.